All right, I know it may sound crazy, but I think Kentucky has a legitimate path to the Final Four.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive in all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Kentucky basketball's potential path to the Final Four. That's right, I think the Kentucky Wildcats could legitimately make a run at the title. Before we get into that, though, I want to remind you guys that we are free and available on all platforms. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. If you've not subscribed to the podcast, please go ahead and do so. It's the best time of the year. It's the best time to sub as we get all of these different things in talking about Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. Going to have Tristan Ferris back on this week to help us preview the Providence matchup. You're not going to want to miss that. So if you're listening on podcast or on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the show. I think Kentucky basketball has a realistic path to the Final Four, and I don't think statistically it's all that difficult. According to Evan, I believe his name is Miyakawa on Twitter. The way I said Twitter there. He is a college basketball analyst, has a phenomenal website, Evan Miyakawa does, breaking down all of these different statistics on college basketball. And this time of year, Evan's been really known for getting out these different title odds and simulating brackets and making these predictions about things. And according to Evan and his analytics, Kentucky has the 13th best odds to win the title. Now, you may say, Lance, that's low. 13th? I mean, if you're going to make a legitimate claim that Kentucky can make the Final Four here, 13th does seem kind of low. To be fair, I think at the same time, you look at the Wildcats and who is above them. There's not a lot of teams that I think realistically, when you look at what they are dealing with, UCLA, Tennessee, both dealing with injuries, UConn, maybe inconsistent shooting-wise. I think that there are some teams up here that, although the analytics do make sense for the most part, are they truly capable of making that type of title? Like Tennessee has a 7.1% chance to win the national title. That's like the 8th best. Not a chance. No. I think teams like Kentucky have a better opportunity to maybe make a run because they are a little bit more complete. The fact that Kentucky is getting healthy right now is very important, I think, for the Wildcats. The team right above them is honestly, I think, the team that if Kentucky gets past, they can win their next game and get to the Final Four, and that's Marquette. Marquette is a 2 seed, and if all things kind of work out the way they should be expected to, Kentucky would face off against Marquette in the Sweet 16. It's a very difficult matchup, but I want to get to why it may not be as difficult as some people might think in just a moment. But overall, Kentucky has a legitimate chance to win the national title according to analytics. And then on top of this, if we're talking about just making it out of the first couple of games, I understand last year. I understand the fact that it was an upset. It's the first time in Coach Cal's career, he said as much recently, over the fact that that's the first time he's been upset in the first round like that. Just heartbreaking. But how many times is that going to happen again? Really hope it doesn't happen this year, to be completely honest with you. It could. Nothing is off the table now after we saw what happened last season. But if we're talking realistically, if we're just trying to look at matchups and talent, Kentucky should be favored in their first game against Providence. They should also have a legitimate shot to beat Kansas State, a team that does not have a great offense. I want to get to these matchups a little bit more in depth in a second. But these first couple of games, I think Kentucky fans are kind of hung up on the fact that, we can kind of maybe get out of this first game, but outside of that, there's not any sort of, legitimate expectation that they push for anything in the tournament run, immunity. And that's what I said whenever the bracket was revealed. Somebody asked me, what's the realistic expectation here? Kentucky wins a game and plays valiantly against Kansas State, but they lose. That's kind of where my baseline is. But if we're trying to project and look at all different outcomes, Kentucky getting to the Final Four, I think, is a possibility that we should be considering. Now, what did I say on Sunday and what did I say on yesterday's show? You cannot set unrealistic expectations for this team, right? Because of the fact that this is kind of an year. Now, some of you did have some interesting comments explaining like, well, you have to understand the preseason expectations set in place. So yes, we still do have those expectations partially, but for the most part, there is a legitimate reason to be disappointed and feel like there's pressure on Coach Cal, which I think is fair. I think all of that's fair. But right now at 21-11, do we really think the Wildcats are going much further past the round of 32? I think there's a chance. So we start with that matchup against Providence. We're going to have a legitimate breakdown of this game against Providence later on in the week. I believe Tristan Ferris will be joining us, and we'll put that episode up on Thursday for you guys. But Providence, like I've already mentioned, they have an efficient offense, right? Bryce Hopkins, we know the storyline there. But what has bothered Kentucky so far this year? It's been teams that can score at the rim, and it's been teams that have length and get out in transition. Providence does not play with a fast tempo. They're underneath average and adjusted tempo and average possession length on offense. They do not score particularly well at the rim. They're average in 2-point field goal percentage. They also get blocked a lot. So I think that you look at these individual players, Bryce Hopkins could pose a problem for the Wildcats. He also couldn't. He's been in this Kentucky system. He understands the system, but I think more importantly, the Kentucky players on roster, kids like Jacob Toppin, understand his game. They played against him in practice for over a year. Kentucky gets Bryce Hopkins. They can shut him down. Now, he end up may going for 40, I don't know. But they do have the ability to shut him down. I realistically think that Kentucky does find a way to do that. Now, is it going to happen? Again, not a prediction segment. Been trying to say that, trying to save all my predictions for probably tomorrow. But you get out of that first round, you play a team like Kansas State. Like I just mentioned, Kansas State, offensively, not the most efficient team in the nation. In fact, I'll pull it up right for you here. They're 52nd nationally in offensive efficiency, but they're 19th in defensive efficiency. They score better at the rim. They don't score well from three. They get blocked a ton. They turn the ball over an insane amount. They're 311th nationally in average height. They don't have a great rotation at all. Actually, they're 325th in bench minutes. They don't pose a lot of problems other than the fact that they can play decent defense against the Wildcats, which we've seen in the past that has also given Kentucky problems. But at this point, you start to throw out some of these different analytics. We've said this so far this week as well. You start to throw out some of these numbers. Some of them are important. Some of them you can use to kind of break things down. But as a whole, it's very difficult in March and the postseason when things get desperate. It's very difficult to use just strictly numbers. You have to go off of, as the cool kids say, you have to go off vibes. I'm kind of joking there. I use that phrase frequently. But you have to go off of eye test as well. How is this team playing right now? What are they doing to impress? And like I mentioned, Kansas State has lost their last two games heading into this one. Kansas State would be that round of 32 matchup, likely. Unless it's Montana State, and then we have a different conversation. Almost almost an easier conversation. And then the final team I want to get to here before you get to that Elite Eight matchup, because I think that's less relevant than what Marquette poises for the Wildcats. Marquette's a problem. They're top 8 in the country in offensive efficiency. They shoot very well from inside the arc. They have a decent defense as well. They turn people over. They don't have a great rotation, but they're not short. They have a little bit of length to them. They've got a couple of forwards that could give Kentucky problems. I think that Marquette is an issue. But if we're talking about Coach Cal, and we're having the conversation that he can't get over the hump, he can't do this, that, and the other over the past 5 seasons, Shaka Smart, the head coach of the Marquette Golden Eagles, has been to the Final Four once in his career, and that was back at VCU. Since then, he has done this. Round of 32, lost in the first round, lost in the first round, lost in the first round, didn't make the postseason, lost in the first round, won the NIT, didn't make it to the tournament because it was canceled due to COVID-19, lost in the first round, lost in the first round. I think it's pretty straightforward with Shaka Smart. His teams have almost never found success in the postseason outside of a trip to the Final Four in 2011, over a decade ago, and an NIT title in 2018. If we're going to complain about coaching, if we're going to complain about not being able to get anywhere, Shaka couldn't do it at Texas. And you may say, well, Texas and Kentucky aren't comparable. Remember a few months ago when we were talking about Cal maybe going to Texas? Do we all remember that? This is a situation that Kentucky can get out of. It's, again, what did I talk about yesterday? It's about, and I just said a minute ago, it's about where you are mentally. It's about where the eye test is. Does your team look like they're playing with confidence? Are they playing with confidence? Are they playing with chemistry? Are they healthy? Do the different pieces look like they fit together? It's not just individual talented players. It's a team that can make something happen. If you beat Marquette, if you overcome that solid offense, if you're able to somehow either score enough yourself or protect the rim just a little bit better than you have all year, I think Kentucky will play Duke. I think Duke makes it to that Elite Eight matchup. I think Duke beats Purdue. If it's Purdue, then you have a problem with Zach Edey, right? And you've got a very efficient offense you have to go up against and a pretty solid defense as well. You saw Purdue just kind of play, I would say, underneath their standard against Penn State. And if you look at Penn State statistically, go over to their KenPom page if you can. Normally, you see teams that are in like the blue and the greens and the light greens with all their different statistical categories. If it's red and the darker red it gets, it means it's really bad and you can see where they rank nationally. Purdue is bright red in 6 categories. They're 321st or worst in turnover percentage on defense. They don't turn people over. They don't grab offensive rebounds. They don't get to the foul line at all. They don't record blocks. They don't record steals. They don't record turnovers, period. They're short. Their bench rotation is extremely short. They are the most experienced team in Division I college basketball. But outside of that, they're slow. Their possession lengths are extremely long on both sides of the ball. The only thing they have going for them is they can shoot the three. Man, they can shoot the three, and they don't turn the ball over because it's a bunch of veterans. It looks like Kentucky may be able to find some type of mental momentum and make something out of a matchup against a team like Purdue or a team like Duke. At that point, you really do start to throw out numbers. It's just matchup dependent. And Duke, like I said, is a solid team. They're a good team, but they're not great offensively. They don't shoot well inside the arc. They've got some height, but even those guys haven't finished at an incredible rate. I would say similar to Kentucky, their shot selection has been at best questionable for the majority of the season. That's a team Kentucky can beat. There's nothing off the table in this tournament. You guys said as much in the chat on Sunday. So why not the Wildcats? I'm going to talk actually on tomorrow's show about why not. I'm using this as kind of I'm not trying to sell hope, and I'm not predicting it. By the way, if you're going to leave a hate comment, understand one thing. I'm not predicting Kentucky to make the Final Four. I just think there's a realistic chance that they make the Final Four because of their individual matchups and because this field is just wide open. And also, I think the East region is probably going to be the most fun region. Anywho, if you have any thoughts on that, if you want to be negative, if you want to be positive, if you want to be that one guy that's continued to comment and say, I've been saying since the beginning of the season, Kentucky's going to make the Final Four. If you end up being right, man, I'm going to shout you out. I don't have your name pulled up in front of me, but I will never forget your prediction, man. But if you have any comments, you can leave them in the YouTube comments below, or you can hit me on the socials at LockedOnUK on Twitter. Before I get to some more thoughts on Kentucky and how far they can realistically go, got some thoughts from Saturday Down South. Also want to talk about Tshiebwe making the AP All-American team. Want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. We are now past the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000, and that's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All you have to do is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So, don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Listen, if you have not checked out the Locked On College Basketball podcast, you need to check out, at the very least, the Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown. They gave their opinion on every single game that's going to potentially happen, and they gave their entire thoughts on the whole bracket. They are great. Andy Patton and Isaac Shade over there at the Locked On College Basketball podcast. They also had national analysis from insights from all these different people. They also made it onto the March Madness app, breaking down the tournament, which is absolutely incredible. They have everything you need over there to make the most informed decisions on your bracket. You can find the episode on the Locked On College Basketball podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube as well. You are missing out if you are not following Andy Patton and Isaac Shade over there. So Kentucky, I think, has a realistic path to the Final Four. We're going to talk about tomorrow about whether or not they have the pieces, which I think there's an argument to be made both ways, so we'll get into that. But Saturday Down South has a writer that I respect quite a bit. Connor O'Gara, he's a senior writer there, has been there for quite some time. Really enjoyed reading his stuff for years now. He put out a piece with every single SEC team and how far they could go realistically in the NCAA tournament. He's predicting it. And he thinks that Kentucky makes it to the Sweet 16. He thinks they don't get past Marquette. I'm going to read what he has to say. I don't know how the Cats got a more favorable draw than Texas A&M and Missouri, but here we are. Yes, the Bryce Hopkins revenge game is certainly on the table in the opening game against Providence. I just can't imagine John Calipari will suffer another devastating loss. I mean, Calipari got his own private scouting report on Hopkins every day last year. I've got to think he knows at least some sort of plan to contain Providence's leading scorer. The Friars have been a bit one-dimensional, and they struggled down the stretch. Not only does Kentucky avoid the round one upset, it also gets a little revenge on Kansas State after the 2018 Sweet 16 game. As awesome of a story as Keontae Johnson's return has been with KSU, I think UK gets a lift from a healthy Cason Wallace, as well as an All-American showing from Oscar Tshiebwe, who dominates an undersized squad. Great analysis so far. So then, what's Kentucky's undoing this time? Shaka Smart. Marquette avenged both of its post-Christmas losses and is capable of winning any style of game. My guess, a less talented Golden Eagles team reminds us why coaching matters this time of year, and his team gets to too many high percentage looks for Kentucky to keep pace. All things considered, Kentucky fans would probably be pleased just to reach the second weekend at this point. I think that this is a very, very, very fair prediction and good breakdown of what the path could look like for UK. I agree with Connor. But again, I think that there is a step you can take this further. I think that Kentucky can beat Marquette. I do think Kentucky can beat Marquette. Because like he mentioned, Cal is not going to have some type of wild loss again. If that's the mentality we're having, then why would he lose to a guy that's never made it past the first round of the NCAA tournament? I'm not predicting, by the way, I'm not predicting Marquette to lose to Vermont. I don't think a lot of people are. If they do lose to Vermont, that's going to be very crazy. It's going to be wild to see a 2 lose to a 15. It's crazy when that happens, right? And I don't know if Marquette, to be honest with you, is going to lose to a team like USC, or they're going to lose to a team, or rather, no, that would be the game they play before they play Kentucky. They would play either the 7 seed, Michigan State, or they would play the 10 seed USC. I don't think Marquette is going to be taken down by Michigan State, who offensively I just don't think is very efficient this season, despite them having a very strong strength of schedule. I don't think that Michigan State is going to be able to do a lot against them, just because I've seen them in person doesn't mean anything. But after seeing them in person, I just don't know if they have the tools to stop Vermont. And then USC is a team that is similar. I mean, they've got a weaker strength of schedule, and they score just about the same as Michigan State does. Marquette, I think, is just offensively, as the kids say, again, built different. Again, I use that phrase quite a lot. So Kentucky facing off against Marquette. These are two offenses that are solid. These are two defenses, actually, that Kentucky's actually statistically, from a points per game perspective, better than. Kentucky's got a legitimate shot, man. They've got a legitimate shot. Now, Marquette does have a better strength of schedule. They have a better net ranking. Oh, excuse me. They don't have a better SOS. They have a better net ranking, and they have a better ranking versus top 25 opponents. Kentucky has kind of struggled against those and lost close games. But, man, I do think that if Kentucky does get to that point, we're looking at a world where Wildcats make the Final Four. And there are going to be some people out there that somehow find it within themselves, if this happens, to complain about Kentucky not winning a national title. With this team, I'd be pleased. If they make it to the Final Four, I'd be very pleased. I'd be like, you overexceeded my expectations by a lot. I would be happy. Would you be happy? I think I'd be pretty content. The final thing I want to get to here, and again, really good stuff from Connor O'Gara. I would encourage you to check out his prediction article over on Saturday Down South. Oscar Tshiebwe has made the second team of the AP All-American list. First team had Zach Edey from Dawe, Jalen Wilson from Kansas, Tracy Jackson Davis from Indiana, Brandon Miller from Alabama, Marcus Sasser from Houston. Tshiebwe made the second team along with Jacques Jr. From UCLA, Drew Timme from Gonzaga, Azuolas Tubelis from Arizona, and Jalen Pickett from Penn State, who has been a bucket getter from them so far this season. So there you have that. I'm excited that Tshiebwe made it back. I think his numbers definitely did earn him a spot there. I can't really think of another center/forward that would have been more deserving of getting in there as that second best, essentially, forward in the country. But I didn't do a ton of research on it, to be completely honest with you. I just wanted to say congratulations to Tshiebwe for, I can only assume, closing out his career strong for the Kentucky Wildcats. So that's all I had for today, and that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the YouTube comments. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.